Here we go. Welcome to the speaker series. While we are waiting for those participants coming in, we're going to show you a little video clip of our guest. With that said, viewer discretion may be advised. Oh my. All right. We still have people trickling on in, and we will get this started here shortly. Thought we'd give a little snippet to what our guest is all about, but there's a lot more to him than just that, by all means. So with that said, let's get started. Welcome to the AmeriFirst AmeriTrust Speaker Series. My name is Craig Olmstead, and I'll be your host for today's show. You are in store for a powerful 60 minutes today. We are thrilled to have one of the most accomplished and admired champions in the history of mixed martial arts. This is where I would normally go through the accomplishments of our guests, but that would take me the full 60 minutes, so I'll just give you them highlights. Dan Henderson started wrestling at the age of 5 and never looked back, taking care of anyone or anything in his path. Dan competed and excelled at every level, including the Pan American Games and the Olympics, along with countless competitions in between. He moved into mixed martial arts as he looked to challenge himself with a professional career. As with everything else in Dan's life, he won, and he won, and he won some more. Then in 2016, it was time to hang up the fighting gloves, but the winning didn't stop. Dan continued winning in business, purchasing a large building and putting together a gym that he would train, teach, and give back to the community that supported him for so many years. He's in the process of opening a new restaurant, and I can't wait to be one of his customers. Even outside the ring, just as we all do, Dan had opponents that continued to try and knock him down. Business partners that didn't come through, COVID-19 and other challenges continued to come at Dan. But just like inside the ring, Dan keeps winning in life. At the end of these 60 minutes, you're going to say to yourself, how did that incredibly humble man do all of those things on that video that I just saw? Drive, strength, tenacity, commitment, and the desire to win are just the few characteristics of Dan Henderson. We have a special treat for those viewers that asked Dan a question today, a variety of signed articles from Dan in the gym that we'll be sending out. So please make sure we have your full name when you post those questions. We're using the Zoom platform, and in the event we have hackers try and jump in, oh, hang on a minute, wait a minute. Once they see who our guest is, we're not going to get Zoom bombed today, so trust me, that's not going to happen today. Our panel is asking Dan questions: Ron Burgum, President of the Southwest Division; Doug Long, President of the Southeast Division; Dave Game, co-founder of AmeriFirst; and Mark Jones, co-founder of AmeriFirst. Dan, thank you so much for being with us today. And Ron, I'll let you get started with the first question.
Hey, Dan. How you doing?
How's it going?
Mic check for you, bud.
Oh, I'm doing all right. Fabulous.
It's great. It's great to see you. Sorry I couldn't be there with you with COVID and all this stuff going on, but it's a pleasure. Most people don't know our background. Just quickly, you know, we've been friends for 20 years now, and I first met Dan in Japan when he knocked out my friend Renzo Gracie in a minute and 40 seconds. So that is my introduction to Dan Henderson, was him knocking the block off my friend that I flew all the way to Japan to watch win. The good and the bad of that, he was fighting very, you know, somewhat of an unknown, and Gracie was famous, one of the famous Gracie family members. And I was in the corner there with him, and then I got to meet this great American wrestler named Dan Henderson. I didn't realize that was, maybe you said, the first knockout you had in your career, but I guess I'm honored that I was there to see it. So welcome to today, and thanks for being a great friend of mine and the AmeriFirst AmeriTrust family as well. And I just think it's helpful for you to kind of talk about the life prior to you being in mixed martial arts, and we'll call it MMA from here on out. But you know, there's a lot of things you did in your life prior to that, so maybe something would be helpful for let's before we get into the business aspect of how you've transitioned, talk about your life before MMA, and let's give people a little bit of your background Let's start with what you did before you were in MMA and how you got here.
Well, thanks, Ron. I appreciate it, and appreciate being here with you guys. Yeah, my background. I mean, my dad got me started in wrestling at pretty early age, at 5 years old, and I did other sports as well, but I kind of gravitated towards wrestling because it was more of a one-on-one, and it didn't matter if it wasn't up to a coach whether I played or not. It was up to me whether I made the team, and that's what I like most about wrestling, is just the fact that it challenged me and it rewarded me at the same time. I wasn't reliant on coaches or anybody to tell me if I was able to go or not. But my dad was my main wrestling coach growing up, through high school and 2 Olympic teams. But I started wrestling at 5, like I said, and just had a good time doing it. And I think anything that you get good at, or you're going to be the best at, you got to make sure you're having fun doing it. And I definitely enjoyed the sport, and just traveling around the world, being able to see different things, and opening my eyes up to how well we live here in America, and the things that we have here that other countries don't. So, I mean, it was a big learning experience to be involved in any sport that you get to travel. But, I feel like wrestling has molded me into being a better human being, and more dedicated, and just, more confident in life.
One of the things that's interesting about the wrestling part, and I know you started early on, and your dad was the influence of that. But when you were in high school, and you're from Apple Valley, right? You went to Victorville, Victor High School, right? Which is not a large. That's a tiny area in terms of population of people coming out of a market like that, right?
No, it's a pretty small area, and not a huge school either. I think 1,500, 1,800 kids in the high school, which is decent size. But
you ended up also.
I graduated with.
You went to state in high school, and you took, I think, a second as a junior, and maybe as a senior you took 5th.
Yeah, that's correct. My senior year, I got sick the week of state, and still wrestled, but wasn't at my best. Puking between matches wasn't fun, but
so you weren't, because I could. When I look back at your wrestling track record, it's like that was a little strange, because as usually as a guy that's taken second as your runner-up as a junior, the guy comes back and usually wins. So I wanted to ask you that question. It was like, how did you take 5th when you were basically a state champion? Now, going from high school to college is a whole different game in wrestling, right? And being good so you were a good high school wrestler, then you became like a Greco-Roman freestyle national champion in college, right?
Yeah, well, I actually, my senior year in high school, I won high school nationals for freestyle and Greco before I went to college, and then I think I had 21 matches in 5 days. So it was definitely a lot of people in the tournament. I think it's one of the biggest tournaments in the world, wrestling tournaments in the world. But I think I had 130 in freestyle, 100 people in my Greco weight class. So it was. That was fun, but I think I won both styles, and then in college it took me a little while to get back up on the top level of I started focusing on Greco-Roman wrestling after my second year of college, and had the opportunity to travel around Europe a little bit, and mostly Russia, and train with the best guys in the world. And I made an Olympic team when I was 21. So basically because of that.
And then you were in both the 1992 Olympics and took 10th, and you were in the 1996 Olympics and took 12th.
Yeah. Yep. That was, I mean, it was definitely an experience. Both of them, obviously, my first Olympics in 1992 was in Barcelona, and it was, you know, an eye-opening. That was the first big tournament at that level I'd ever been to, and it happened to be the Olympics. And yeah, it was definitely a good experience, something I wouldn't trade for anything. And during opening ceremonies, you know, I got to walk, and I think I started out kind of towards the front of the pack of our U.S. team, and you know, by the time I started walking, I had people behind me telling me to hurry up. I was at the back of the line. You know, I was walking so slow, just taking everything in. And I think that was the first Olympics that we had our dream team there. And I remember looking up and standing next to Magic and Scottie Pippen and all those guys looking up because they were so tall. But, you know, that was, I didn't even know they were going to be at opening ceremonies. They weren't kind of in the holding area waiting to walk with the rest of us, but it was definitely a memorable experience for sure. And in 1996, the Olympics were in Atlanta, and it's definitely a different and much, I don't know about better experience, but competing in front of your home country is definitely a pretty cool experience.
I mean, that's incredible. And so that's a career itself, right? I mean, up to that point, like you've accomplished so many things, and you're competing from the age of 5, and now you're in your 20s, and you're 20 years already, which is a career in wrestling and at the elite, a very, very elite level into Olympics. And then you get this crazy idea to go punch people in the face. And that happened in 1990. So what happened? What happened? How'd that happen?
Well, yeah, I don't know. Randy Couture and myself were training partners in wrestling, you know, for a long time, and we kind of were watching the, you know, all the fights on TV, the MMA fights, and you know, thought they'd be fun to try, but you know, I'm not sure about it. And then Randy calls me up, says, "Hey, I'm doing this tournament in Brazil, and there's a lighter weight tournament." He was doing the heavyweight, and I said, "Okay, I'll do it too." And so I signed up, and 2 weeks later, I was in Brazil fighting. Randy ended up getting a call from the UFC instead, so he fought around the same exact time in the UFC, his debut, and I went down to Brazil, and yeah, it was definitely a different experience. The first time they shut the cage, you know, I was thinking, what did I get myself into? But as soon as they say go and the guy's trying to punch me in the face, it's kind of instinctual, and you're definitely gonna do what you need to do to beat the guy's butt.
So you went to Brazil, which is the kind of the epicenter of the universe for, jiu-jitsu, mixed martial arts, where it initiated and started, was in Brazil. I mean, you're walking into the lion's den when you go down there, big time. Did you know you were getting into that?
Kinda, but not really. I remember when I got down there, hearing all the stories about, the two different, I don't want to say gangs, but two different fascists of the jiu-jitsu guys always competed against the lucha libre guys, which is, kind of the more kickboxing stand-up guys, and they had a big rival going, and all these stories about people getting stabbed from through the cage by fans, and I was a little nervous going in there, and my first fight was against a Brazilian black belt, a Carlson Gracie black belt, and he, I TKO'd him, but the referee kind of stopped it a lot earlier than they're normally used to over there. They were right in the middle of trying to clean the sport up a little bit instead of letting fights go too long. And it was a little bit of an early stoppage, and I thought I was going to get mauled by the fans. There was about 50 fans trying to get into the cage, and I was hoping they were after the ref, not me, but I survived.
Dan,
it was an eye-opening one.
Well, Dan, were you wearing gloves back then?
Gloves. Yeah, I was wearing gloves. I think gloves were optional. Headbutts were legal.
Headbutts were legal.
Yeah.
Soccer kicks back then?
Oh, yeah. Soccer kicks, whatever you want.
Okay, so you were, you didn't realize you were beating the national soccer team when you beat the Gracie black belt that from an American wrestler. That did not go over well. And then you end up having a second.
He got on the mic and kind of calmed the crowd down, said that, need to respect the referees and, blah, blah, blah. So he was pretty gracious with his defeat. But yeah, that was my first fight of my MMA career. Yeah.
Well, welcome to the MMA world. And then I think that just kind of one thing, and I want to invite Doug Long to jump on here after this question. And, I think about you fought in venues all over the world. You fought in Japan, you fought in Brazil, and you fought in the United States. I mean, from where you sit, is there any preference? Do you care? Right now, as UFC don't even have fans when they're fighting. So you've been in some tough circumstances. Did you prefer any of the venues?
I don't know. It's hard to say. They're definitely different. It's all about the crowd's energy. I know fighting in Japan, and the crowds are a lot more quiet, but at the same time, most of the time they have a lot of energy. As soon as anything happens, they speak up, and they understood what was going on a lot better. They were more educated as fans about all the grappling moves that you can do, instead of at the time in America that, the crowds would boo because, there wasn't enough blood being spilled from and punching the guy in the face. So they didn't understand all the grappling techniques like the Japanese did. I think American fans definitely know now, and they're used to the sport a lot better. So you don't hear nearly as much booing at all during fights. But it was, I don't know if I have a preference. I know Canada is also a huge MMA fan base, and obviously Brazil is as well. I know that in Brazil there's been a couple of fights that I've had over there that, they chant that in their Portuguese language, that you're gonna die to the opponent.
Well, we're going to get into that in a minute as to how you actually, deal with that stuff, because I think those are there's a mindset that you have that's obviously very different. And when I was in Japan, I kind of freaked out the fact that there's this fight and you can hear everything that's going on in the ring, right, and no one's talking. And I was just like, this is so, and there's 60,000 people in the audience.
Right.
That was a bizarre experience for me. And I certainly didn't feel at home when I was feeling that going on there, because I also didn't see very many Americans. But look, enough from me asking you questions. I want to bring on some of the panelists. I want to invite Doug Long to jump in here. And Doug?
Hey, Dan. Thank you very much for being on with the crew. I appreciate it. And obviously, I just got to meet you a couple of days ago, and Ron was nice to have us on a pre-call. And one of the things I was asking you was, physically, I know that you do a lot to prepare for a fight, but from a mind preparedness, how do you mentally get into what you're going to do, how you're going to take on your opponent, and, what do you do to prepare mentally?
That's probably one of the toughest things in probably any sport, and maybe all in life, but as or be good at it, you need to be mentally strong too. And you know, it's one of those things that it's one of the toughest things as a coach that it's hard to coach. You know, I think I was fortunate enough to have a pretty hard-ass dad growing up, and you know, kind of instilled certain things in me. But you know, I think the biggest thing is you know, I don't know about the biggest thing, but there's a few key things, and being my personality, you know, I'm a little bit on the stubborn side, and I think you need some of that, because the more stubborn you are, the less quit you have. You know, and obviously without setting goals, you're not going to, you know, be sacrificing anything, and, you know, be dedicated enough to do it, you know. But I think one of the more, you know, kind of the best trait to have is confidence. You got to be confident in yourself. And I think all that comes from the way you practice, the way you train, and that's anything in life. I mean, if you're not prepared for something, you know, it's going to show when you go to perform, regardless of what you're performing. If you're trying to sell something, if you're not sure exactly what you're selling, and not sure how good the product is or whatever it is, you know, people feel that. And, you know, in my world, if I wasn't prepared, if I wasn't in shape, you know, it doesn't matter how much I know about everything else, I can't perform, being too tired or whatever it is. You know, just having that self-confidence is huge in anything in life. And you know, and then the stubbornness and determination to not quit when it gets a little bit tough. You know, you just kind of change gears a little bit sometimes, and kind of find a way to make it work. And you know, in my world, there's injuries that cause problems that you kind of have to work around injuries. And I know over the years, I've had numerous different kinds of injuries where, you know, in training, I might have to start doing something a little bit different because I can't do it the way I used to, because it hurts, you know. And you kind of change your style a little bit based on that. And you just got to make sure that you're trying to be smart in training and not beating yourself up, but at the same time, you know, getting all the work you need done, and being prepared enough to be confident during the fight or on your performance day, I'll call it. You know, so I think that's the biggest thing mentally that I've gone through. And you know, it's a, like I said, it's a tough thing to coach or train. But you know, if you have, everybody kind of has negative thoughts that creep into their head. Oh, what happens if this guy does this, or if they say that, or if they do this to me? And you know, you just need to kind of get rid of those thoughts, and kind of put some positive ones in there, and reinforce yourself with some positive attitude. And you know, instead of worrying about, and this is what I tell all my fighters and guys that I've coached, instead of worrying about what somebody's going to do to you, you know, focus on what you're going to do to them. And you know, typically if you're worried about what somebody's going to do to you, it almost always happens to you. So, you know, focus on what your strengths are and what you're going to be able to do to the guy. You know, and
I actually watched some of your videos there, Dan, and last night for a couple hours. And one of the things that really caught me was that you actually had really studied your opponent. And when you're talking about being prepared, because I can't remember exactly who it was, but he kept going to the right, which was going right towards your right hand. And he just said, sooner or later I was going to hit him, because he was working right into my strategy. And so being prepared for your opponent, do you actually spend a lot of time like finding other people that fight like that opponent, or how do you actually prepare physically and with for that fight when you have somebody that's a new opponent that has a different style?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I just kind of see who would be a good fit to bring into training camp. Usually, I bring in one or two guys that kind of have the same either body type or style as the opponent I have, and kind of focus on certain things that my opponent is good at, and making sure that I either stay away from that aspect of the fight, or I'm good enough to defend whatever he's best at. And you know, like Ron was saying earlier, the first fight he came out and watched me at, Joe Gracie, you know, and that was a fight that went almost exactly how I trained for it. You know, I figured that Henzo would, as soon as I hit him fairly hard, he'd start trying to take me down, and you know, I was just gonna sprawl and not get taken down, and punch him on the way in, and I trained to do that whole training camp, and you know, sure enough, that's almost exactly what happened. You know, I didn't quite connect the first couple takedown attempts, but on a, you know, maybe the third takedown attempt, you know, I caught him coming in, and but my point is that when it works out to happen exactly how you pictured it to happen, how you trained for it, how you visualize it to happen, you know, that's what makes you know, being smart in training, you know, come to life, and be definitely worth spending a little extra time watching some video on guys, and being prepared.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I've before Dave gets on to ask a question, he's up next. What were the one or two your toughest fights? Because I was watching your domination. I only watched the ones you were winning, but I'm sure you had a couple ones that you won that were just really, really tough. And what was tough, and how did you get through them? And you know, you have so much tape on you. And I spent 2 hours last night. It was incredible watching. I was hard to go to sleep, by the way. It was 2 o'clock in the morning before I went to sleep. But it was just incredible what I see you do and how you use the strategy. But which one of those ones or two fights that really stood out to you that were like, wow, I had to really come back, change my strategy, whatever it is?
I don't know. I guess I get asked that question a lot, and it's always hard to answer. And I'm glad my fights didn't put you to sleep. So
I'm glad I wasn't on the end of those H bombs.
Yeah. So I don't know. When I fought against Fedor, you know, obviously that went my way, and the second time I fought Van Silva went my way as well, and those are two of my, you know, most proud accomplishments in fights. Probably my toughest night of fighting I've had was in this tournament. It was a 32-man tournament in Japan called Rings, King of Kings, and I had 2 fights in a night, and then I came back and had 3 fights in a night against heavyweights, and you know, I tore my knee up in the second fight halfway through it, and had to finish that fight and then have another fight for the finals after that, and that definitely kind of needed the mental toughness that I had. If I wasn't that mentally tough, I mean, there's no way I would have finished even the second fight. And you know, I know that I had Randy Couture and another guy in my corner after the second fight. They were looking at each other thinking, you know, I'm probably not going to be able to fight in the next fight. And I had about 25 minutes between the semifinals and the finals, and you know, just I think with my background in wrestling and being at the Olympics, and you know, I go out there and they play the national anthem before the fight. That just gives me goosebumps every time, and you know, that just motivated me to get the job done. So you know, I ended up winning the tournament, and and you know, had to nurse my knee for a while, but that was probably the toughest night of fighting I've had.
That's awesome. All right, Mr. Game.
Yeah. No, hey, Dan, welcome to our speaker series. Love what I'm hearing. I love hearing champions talk about how they do what they do and how they get their mind right, how they get their body right. And again, keeping in mind that a lot of the folks on our call listening are champions in a different sport, and that's the sport of real estate sales and real estate finance, because we have a lot of realtors and loan officers on here. And I loved what you said a minute ago when you said how you prepare, that you spend more time focusing on what you can affect or what you can change versus worrying about somebody else and what and how they're going to affect you. So I thought that was brilliant. But I always love hearing how champions become champions. And when, you know, as I was growing up and I'd go through my practices, my sports that weren't anywhere near where you did, but my coach used to say, practice how you're going to play, and you got to get that down. Talk to us a bit, a couple of questions, but this one first. Talk to us about your practice routine. Practice for perfection. I know that's something that resonates with you. What kind of things would you do as you would prepare for your fight? Did you role play? You know, what are the different techniques that you brought in to get Dan Henderson ready to be a peak performer?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I could go on and on about preparation and training, but yeah, I think at an early age, I kind of learned how important visualization is, especially, you know, you can't sit there and physically practice and go over technique for 10, 12 hours a day. But if you do it a few hundred extra times in your mind or 1,000 extra times in your mind, it's almost the same thing as doing it physically. You know, and it really helps you learn how to physically do something a lot better if you can visualize it in your head. You know, and that alone will help kind of save your body to what, you know, what it needs to do timing wise and perfection wise. You know, and obviously visualization isn't going to do it by itself, but it's a big tool in my mind. In most sports, everybody should be visualizing, and that goes, I guess, for anything in life, not just sports. Visualize exactly how a conversation is going to go. Everything. I mean, I go out there and visualize how the fight's going to start. I mean, obviously, I don't visualize the whole 15 to 25 minute fight, but you know, I always play it over in my head the first minute of the fight, and that'll help me focus on my game plan and what I want to do in this fight. And you know, during that time, I'm not focused on what's going to happen to me, but it's more about what I'm going to do. Like I said, I can't say that enough, but you know, a lot of my guys get always worried and nervous about fights and you know, worried about what if the guy's going to do this and that, and you know, the thing that relaxes them down the most is, you know, letting them know that they probably have much tougher training partners than their opponent, and it's just another day of practice. I mean, and in my practice, I've always had the attitude and you know, just to be able to fight hard, you got to train to, you know, you got to fight in training to fight. So you don't do that all the time. Your body wouldn't do well, and my career wouldn't have been 20 years long if I beat myself up. But occasionally you got to get in there and get after it with your training partners and go almost full go. Otherwise, you're not going to learn how to fight fully. So, you know, I think I don't know if that answered your question or not, but that's a big part of it. But I didn't even touch on all the physical things that I do, just all the technique and stuff. As I got older, I definitely did a lot less technique and focused on getting my body ready. You know, the last probably 5 years of my career, I kind of just had to take a step back and reevaluate how to still compete at an older age. You know, my last fight was a title fight at 46 years old, and you know, I felt like I beat the guy up, but didn't come out on top. But still, my body felt fine to go. I just wasn't recovering the way I used to, and ended up spending way too much time on the couch during training camp recovering, and that was the main reason why I retired. My body still would be able to compete, but the preparation was a little tough.
Excellent. No, I love that visualization is a big deal. One other quick question I know Mark's got a question for you, but and these are the fun questions as I look at how MMA and that worked. You were a compilation of a great wrestler, and you went into the MMA sport. And listening to you talk about your first fight and how it happened, and Doug kind of alluding to the H-bomb. And guys, I recommend if you haven't looked at a video, go to a video, and when you think H-bomb, you'll know what we're talking about when you watch Dan take a couple of shots, deliver a couple of shots. Let me restate that. So amazing skill set. But from your seat, wrestling, and I know Greco-Roman is all above waist, right? There's no legs like in freestyle. So how did you, when you know, and technique wise, and I'm sure different fighters were different, you prepare differently, but being the wrestler you were, you know, I've watched some of this, but I've watched quite a bit of your bouts. How did you incorporate the wrestling side in, or did it depend on your opponent if you went to wrestling? Because I suspect your wrestling skills gave you a distinct advantage when you would tie up and get to that stage. So, wrestling or boxing? Which one did you like better?
Well, I can tell you that without wrestling, I wouldn't have accomplished anything in MMA. In my mind, I think wrestling is the best base to have. It allows you to control where the fight goes, but you know, wrestling doesn't finish any fights. And that's where you need to learn either striking or, you know, grappling and submissions to be able to finish an opponent and to not be finished by getting submitted or getting knocked out. I mean, it definitely works both ways. But yeah, I think wrestling is by far the best base to have, and the mentality of most wrestlers, and especially if those wrestlers went to college and went through 4 years of you know, a Division I wrestling school, that they have a different mindset when it comes to training and working out. They're definitely not lazy, and they know what sacrifice, dedication, and hard work is, and you know, without wrestling, I wouldn't have been mentally tough. I wouldn't have been physically tough, and I wouldn't have been technically where I should be to be able to accomplish what I did in MMA. So I definitely am proud to be, you know, a wrestler and consider myself a wrestler. And you know, I just think that in this life and kids growing up, wrestling is one of those easier, accessible sports out there. Most high schools have it for free, and you know, they don't have MMA, they don't have jiu-jitsu, but they have wrestling, and it's a good way to start a kid out, to kind of get them a little bit toughened up. And that's coming from the dad. And
Thanks, Dan. Maymar?
Yeah, Dan, thanks for coming on. And what you just said, sacrifice, self-discipline, and that is and so relevant to everything that we do in sports and in the sales world. So it's amazing through all our speaker series that consistently comes through. So it's wonderful to hear you say that. And the other thing, before I ask my question, before we were on the pre-call, I asked you about the Olympic experience. You kind of already answered that, And when I hear people talking about, you know, that opening ceremony and closing ceremony, it just gives me goosebumps, because that's like on a bucket list. I'll never perform this bucket list because I'm not qualified to do it, but it just seems to me like being around all those elite athletes walking into the Olympic Stadium or on the closing ceremony, the way you described it, you just kind of stood there and watched the pro basketball players and all these elite athletes go by. It had to be just a really cool experience. So thanks for sharing that with us.
No, absolutely. And I can share another story that you mind.
Go ahead,
about
please.
The Olympics, if it won't take too long, but I remember, you know, and I think it's one of the main reasons why hearing the national anthem gives me goosebumps. It kind of brings me back to the first Olympics I was at in 1992. And after I was done competing, I was there watching the freestyle team compete, and one of the guys competing, his name was Kevin Jackson. I think he did a little bit of MMA as well, but Kevin Jackson was in the gold medal match against a Russian guy that was, I think, currently the world champ. And it was a back and forth match that went into overtime, and Kevin ended up scoring some points, and the Russian guy didn't agree with the call, and ended up kind of being a poor sport about it. And the whole there's a lot of Russian fans in the stands, and when they were doing the medal ceremony, which is right after the match typically, and I remember all the Russian fans started chanting their national anthem a little bit when they were presenting the award for Kevin Jackson, and the American fans that were in there just kind of rose up and overpowered the Russian fans out there singing our own national anthem to go with it. And it was one of the coolest experiences that still gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. That, you know, definitely being in the Olympics made me a lot more patriotic, but, you know, that story comes to mind more than most, about us as a country and pulling for each other. You know, and I've been in other countries and sports, and there's no other country that's as patriotic as Americans, and pull for each other like we do. So I'm definitely proud to call myself an American.
Well, thanks for sharing that with me. I love those kind of stories, and I'm really glad you mentioned the poor sportsmanship of the Russians, because I too looked at some videos last night, and I just kind of randomly went out there and I came across a fight that you actually lost. And at the end of the fight, it was against Daniel Cormier in 2014, I believe. The end of the fight, they interviewed both fighters, and he was just this arrogant, yeah, I'm going on to the next guy, and I'm going to do this, blah, 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 blah. And when they came over to you, you just displayed such humility and such grace in adversity to just, you know, say, you know, I didn't prepare right, you know, I'm going to have another shot. You're so soft-spoken, and it's so different from a lot of the folks that are in that sport and some people that are in sports directly. So I really admire you. And that humility and that grace in adversity that you have. And speaking of that, when you do have a setback like you had there, or multiple others you do, how do you mentally get yourself prepared to overcome that obstacle and get on to the next? And maybe not just a loss, maybe an injury or a setback in life. How does Dan set himself up to overcome obstacles? If you could share that with our audience.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Yeah, I think definitely the first step is recognizing where you went wrong, what your mistakes were. You know, they're typically, you look at it a lot closer after a loss or a setback than a win. But I try to, in every fight, even the ones that I do well in and win, you know, what did I do wrong? And, you know, I think that's the first step of kind of recognizing it, then setting goals to get better at certain techniques in that realm. And, I think that's probably the biggest part of it, but just staying positive and knowing that, and it all comes back to the word confidence with me, but knowing what you're capable of doing and going out there and try to make it happen and the way you you can. And I've had streaks of 3 losses in a row, and it's not an easy thing to still have your confidence in yourself when you're coming off of 3 losses and you got another tough opponent. And but I typically just don't worry about what other people think, what other people say, and know that I'm capable of doing certain things and going out there and making sure that I get it done this time. And that motivates me to prepare harder, prepare, a little bit more, and make sure that there's not going to be any surprises in this next fight or with this next opponent. And, I think those are the biggest things that make me step up after having some setbacks. And that goes with injuries too. Injuries were a little bit easier than three losses in a row. Injuries kind of suck, but you still know you're capable of something, but you're just waiting for your body to work right. And eventually it will, and you slowly get there. And, but, back to the word stubborn again as well, just making sure you're stubborn enough to not have any quit in you.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I wrote that down as soon as you said it before I give it to Craig. That, this is Dan Henderson. The more stubborn you are, the less quit you have. I love that. I'm gonna put that on my wall. Back to you, Craig. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah. Love everything I've heard. Same thing. I've got goosebumps going down, chills through the last 45 minutes or so. The one thing for me is we've been having some speakers that talk about role playing more in specific target areas, and I heard you say that you bring in those special opponents based on who you're going to play. And I think being ready and prepared, part of the role playing that we do in the mortgage business and the real estate side is so key, so that you are prepared for that buyer, for that seller, for that whatever the case is. But anyway, I want to get to the questions. We have a few of them in the queue. The first one comes from an anonymous attendee, so I'm not really sure why this person didn't want something signed from you, but hopefully they can follow back up and we can get them out something signed. But how much success do you think, Dan, is hard work versus talent versus mindset?
That's probably the toughest question, the oldest question in sports or anything competitive. There's people that, and I see it with you see it more in kids, that some kids just have natural talent, some don't. Some have to work harder because they don't have all the natural talent, and the kids that have the natural talent typically, sometimes don't work as hard as they should or could. But I think you got to have a good combination of all of it. Obviously, if you weren't born to do something, you might not be the best in the world at it. But be stubborn enough to make sure that you give it everything you have to get there. And I think your mindset is a huge thing. Technically, you got to be prepared enough, and I would say those two things are bigger than any natural talent out there. Just having the right mindset and the preparedness to be confident in what you can do is huge. So I would probably put those two ahead of the natural ability you see in people.
Perfect. Michael Switzer asked, do you have anyone you're training with currently going to either the next Olympics or going to be fighting in the MMA?
Well, I haven't been coaching any wrestlers in a long time. I've been focused mostly on MMA, but I've got 2 or 3 guys in my gym that fight in the UFC and some in Bellator as well. Smiley and Sam Alvey and Tarek Safadine are both fighters that are in the UFC, and Ashley Yoder as well. Ashley Yoder has a fight coming up in August, so if you guys are a fan, tune in to watch her.
Awesome. Awesome. This comes from Mike Koenig. You were one of the best to ever step into the ring and eventually became the hunted. How did you challenge yourself, your team, your supporters to maintain and keep your hunter mentality and tenacity? And have you continued doing that in that mindset in the business world?
You know, I think as I got a little older and more experienced, you know, depending on the opponent, some I was more excited to fight, some I wasn't very excited to fight. You know, but the biggest thing is acknowledging or determining what the biggest challenge of that fight's going to be, and then, you know, I got excited about the bigger the challenges. The tougher the opponent, I get more excited. You know, but if I don't have that tough an opponent or didn't think that highly of them, I still don't underestimate anybody and make sure I'm over prepared for it. It's just going to make the fight happen a lot easier and better for me. You know, but I think just making sure that you're having fun doing it. That I think those things right there just made my fight career prolong and go a long ways. And I don't know. That's a tough question, but I was always motivated, and that's the question I've been asked quite often is how did I stay motivated after doing it for so long, and just the challenge. It's a challenging sport, and the bigger the challenge, the more excited I got, and you know, the more prepared I would make sure I was.
I like that. I like that a lot, actually. A couple questions regarding your diet. Joe wants to know, what was your diet like with training? And then John's asking about, are you still sticking to a certain diet?
I was pretty good with my diet during training, especially training camps. The last 5 or 6 years of my career, I had pre-made meals. A local company that I had here that made meals for me, and they were pretty well balanced. A lot of you know, all the nutrients I need. I'd always do my supplements and protein shake in the morning, and with different various vitamins and stuff. You know, so I would eat fairly well. Now I don't really stick to a diet. I should probably start. I'm getting a little bit chubby. I need to either work out more or get back on my diet, or both. Yeah,
You mean you're not looking like this guy here in the picture?
No, not so much. A little bit. I mean, I haven't in 3.5 years. I think I put on about 10 or 15 pounds, but yeah, that's about it. I still get out there and train with my guys occasionally. So and I can do just as well as I did before, but I can only do one round at a time right now.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I'm sure they're still petrified of that one round. Lisa asks, how much do you focus on your weaknesses versus key strengths? There are two schools of thought for elite performers, and she's curious on what your thoughts are on that.
Well, obviously, you know, you're only good as your weakest link type of thing. But in my world, it kind of depends also on your opponent that you have. That if your biggest weakness is in the same area as their biggest strength, then you better work on your weakness, you know, quite a bit for that training camp. And I'll tell you that alone has really improved me dramatically on certain aspects of MMA when I have to focus on one specific type of thing or a whole training camp, just because the other guy was really good at it, and I wasn't all that great at that aspect of of fighting. So that definitely made me improve on different areas quite a bit that normally kind of overlook. So yeah, I think working on your weaknesses is huge, but sometimes it's not necessary either. If that weakness is the same as your opponent's weakness, it's not going to matter. And you kind of look at what his weaknesses are and what his strengths are, and formulate a good game plan to come up with each opponent against each opponent. So, that's a tough question to answer, but you definitely need to work on your weaknesses regardless. Eventually you're going to need to be good at it. So you might as well work on those now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dylan asks about how do you deal with an opponent who talks a lot of trash? I've gotten into your sport over the last few years, and I've seen a lot of that trash talking. So how do you keep that from getting into your head, and how do you deal with that?
I enjoy it. I mean, I enjoy hearing all the trash talking that I just have my lack of a better word, but my shit-eating grin on my face, and know exactly what I'm going to do to him when I get the chance. So again, that comes back to being confident, and the self-confidence you have in yourself is everything. Don't worry. I don't worry about what anybody thinks. I don't worry about what the media says. I don't worry about what my opponents say. It all matters what I know that I can do, and how I'm going to perform. So it really is up to myself when I'm out there, how I do, and how well I perform. I'm not worried about his performance. A lot of times when I have an opponent that has a good reputation or been around a long time, I hope that they're the most prepared they've ever been, because I want to fight the toughest version of them and test myself against that. And it gets me excited when I have that opportunity to do that, and knowing that they were prepared and still I go out there and beat them means a lot more to me than, he came in out of shape and everything else. It doesn't mean as much that way. So I don't know if I got off subject on that one or not, but I think I answered it.
All good. Sounds like it motivates you, and you're ready to shut that mouth for them, right?
Oh, yeah.
Jim Gaffney has a comment and a question. You said you wrestled in the East Coast when you were at ASU in the early 90s, and you were known as around the country as top dog. Huge fan of yours. And he goes on to ask about how you feel about the current status of youth sports, and where most athletes as young as 6 are focused on one year-round sport compared to diversifying multiple sports throughout their youth.
I don't know. I guess I have mixed feelings about that. I think it's good for them to have a little bit of more diversity and let them do a few other sports, but that gives them a chance to really know what exactly they want to do, and maybe they thought they liked a certain sport, but they might like a different one a little bit better, and it gives them a chance to kind of figure that out. And if they like something, they're going to have a lot better performance out of them in the long run than if they don't really like the sport to begin with. So it's a tough question, but kids are doing it year round, a lot younger now, and makes it tough for the other guys to really compete against them at that young of an age. But yeah, I think you still have to learn what you're good at, what sport you're good at. It might not be the sport they thought they were good at. So I don't know if I answered that one well or not.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Great answers. The questions keep coming in, so you're doing great. Jamie wants to know, keeping with the kid theme there, how would you teach your kids to have a no quit mindset, or if they have a great work ethic, what's a practical way to teach them to go to the next level in their sport?
Like I said, I think that mental toughness is one of the toughest things to teach someone. I know that my dad was mentally tough and kind of had that hard ass attitude, and I don't know if it was instilled in me or if it was genetically in me or what, but my dad didn't take I can't do something for an answer, and I think that's a big part of it. Just getting that message across to a kid, saying, you know, you are capable of doing something. You need to just try a little harder. Don't just quit so easy. I mean, that's definitely happens quite a bit in life, and with kids especially, that they kind of learn that, oh, it can't. It's kind of a little too hard to do. I can do it easier a different way, and it might not be the right way, but you know, or I don't like that sport because it's too hard. Yeah, sometimes kids need to get pushed a little bit and encouraged in the right way, and that's a tough thing to kind of navigate through, but depending on how the kid is, I guess.
Yep, absolutely. We're almost out of time. We got a couple more questions I'd like to get in here quickly. Michael asks again, what do you do in your spare time when you get away from MMA?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I definitely have gotten a little bit farther away from MMA since I retired. I still coach guys, but I don't watch nearly as many fights on TV that I used to. I don't go to nearly as many fights. But I like to go hunting, and I like to go to the lake or the river and hang out on the boat, especially summertime. Um, hang out with the kids, just enjoy life a little bit.
And you have 4 children, is that correct?
That is correct.
Awesome.
I have 4 children.
Let's see. Yeah, great. Would you ever bring out a Team Quest gym to Florida?
Absolutely. I mean, I typically just license the name out to the gyms that are out there. So, but it all depends on who it is and the type of attitude they have about teaching and life, and but I'm pretty easygoing when it comes to that. But yeah, we have a few Team Quests around the world.
Awesome. All right, and the last question that I had time for, Marla asks, where do you get your energy?
Where do I get my energy? I don't know about these days. I'm not sure. I wake up tired sometimes in the morning, but I don't know. It's just being like being motivated to get up and do things and accomplish things. You know, Obviously my goals nowadays are a little different than what I had 5 years ago when I was competing, and I set goals in life even still to try to accomplish, and I'm working on making them happen, and just being motivated and getting the little things done that you can each day, and eventually you're going to get there. So I don't know about where I'm getting energy from nowadays, but um, I don't know. Tough one. Hopefully,
Well, I heard you say I heard you say you liked what you did. You're confident. You're prepared. Your determination not to quit. I mean, all of those things to me breed a lot of energy. I can only imagine. So I'm sure it's just something that you've got. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being with us today. Dan, I'd like to invite Ron back in here for some closing thoughts and comments. And just from a housekeeping perspective, Michael, Alexander, if you could send your address to consideritdone@amerifirst.com. We will get out some signed materials. I think I have everybody else's contact information. So, Ron?
Well, Dan, I didn't expect this. I got to tell you, I got my glove on now. I've been working on my pull-up bar as I've been listening to the advice. I took my jacket off. I've been slamming some push-ups on the ground. You motivated me, man. This is awesome. one thing you said that just, I have heard you speak for 20 years, and I don't think I've ever heard you say it, and including in the interviews I've heard, visualization.
Yeah.
So you're giving us that little black bookmark, you know, that black belt move, right? That we can use, because you know, you've heard, you kind of hear that from some people sometimes. One of the prolific guys that loves you and follows you is Conor McGregor, and the one thing that McGregor says all the time is visualization, right? So I was like kind of like taken back that you said that, but it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, the visualization you've been practicing since you were a kid.
Right.
But to hear you talk about that today really hit me, because I can see how that would apply to anything that's listening right now, can use that skill before they go into a meeting, visualizing the outcome of that meeting. Before they go and do a presentation, visualizing the outcome of their presentation they're going to give. And I personally took a page of notes here, Dan. I was very fired up. I appreciate you, my brother, for being on this call and sharing your life stories and your successes, and they've been incredible. And we all appreciate you. And guys, you want to jump on and say thank you to Dan, please do. But Dan, thank you, my brother. I appreciate you.
Yeah, hey, Dan.
Hey, Dan.
Absolutely, Dan.
Really appreciate you, man. You have great advice. And the one thing, the question about trash talking, I was sitting here going, the way you make them stop trash talking, you show them the H-bomb. That stops the trash talking. Thanks for being here.
Sometimes people have to talk them into doing certain things, and if they need to trash talk, that's kind of the way they prepare for going into a fight and having confidence in themselves. They have to sometimes do that, or have a mean face on to go out there and fight somebody. Me, I just enjoyed what I did and knew I was prepared, and so I was gonna smile at them during the face-off and go out and do what I know I can do. So,
Love it.
and visualization is huge in that, and it does definitely gets overlooked quite a bit, and probably don't talk about it much because nobody even asks about it typically.
Well, thanks, Dan.
It's key
We
in
really
everything.
appreciate you.
Key in everything winning for life, visualization and being prepared is the key to everything. So thank you again, Dan. Appreciate it. Thank you for all the participants that joined us today. Feel free to go to our AmeriFirstSpeakerSeries.com or AmeriTrustSpeakerSeries.com and see any future speakers. Everybody stay safe, be well, and have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, guys.